Let's see if we're pushing out live. So if you're joining us, we're behind the scenes. Emil Guillermo here. Going to my little monitor here just to see if we're live. Hi everyone. Happy Sunday. A good Sunday to you. Hope you're enjoying yourselves. We said that we're going to be live at 11:45, our normal time, but we like to sort of give you that little something extra. I think they call it lanyap, right? I think I'm a stickler for pronunciation. Only because people they say my name wrong, and it's Filipino. And the Filipinos say the double L's Guillermo. I know I'll be saying this for most of my life. We say Guillermo. We say the L and the Y. We do not say we don't say Guillermo. The L's, right? The two L's as Y's. We say the L and the Y. So it's Guillermo. So just a reminder to people. I mean, some people say, "Oh, Emil, I don't like your accent." Oh, this is not my accent. This is the way my mom and dad communicated to me. And when I do my mom and dad, I do it as an homage to them, not to put you down. But then let's reciprocate. Say the double L's the way the Filipinos do, because we know that the Filipinos say the double L's. The Filipinos say the double L's Guillermo. I mean, when they say Guillermo, just one of those Filipino synchronous sort of things that we do, idiosyncratic things that we do with the language. And as you know, there's 7,200 islands, dialect practically in every island. And so when your mom is Tagalog and your father is Ilocano, they don't speak to each other except in bad English. So anyway, now we're up to 11:45. We said we were going to go live. Welcome. I'm Emil Guillermo. I'm the museum director of the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. This is our virtual pop-up. Views expressed are my own, but the views are out there. I mean, I'm going to be reading from some news things and some historical records that you should know about. So we do this pop-up every Saturday and Sunday. We try to keep it short within, we can go as long as 2 hours. We've been as long as 2 hours, which I know sounds like 2 hours, Emil. Come on. We have football games to watch. No, I know, but you can come back to the recording and you can sort of like use the fast forward. That's like a modern technological advance. And you can skip over some of the preamble, the rambling preamble, but it's important because, we're engaging. We're engaging with you. The museum is closed. You would ordinarily come by Saturday and Sunday and said, "Oh, where's the coffee and donuts, Emil?" Or, "Hey, hi." You come by 337 East Weber, but we're not open because of COVID. And the threat is real that San Joaquin County, where the museum is going to go up from red. Red is like less restrictive to purple, which is more restrictive. No coincidence that I'm wearing purple today, but purple is the most restrictive. But it looks like it's happening. COVID is spreading. We have been under COVID lockdown pretty much since March 15th. And because we want to protect you, people who come to the museum, and we want to protect ourselves, the museum volunteers, of which many are in that endangered group. So I'm in my closet here in San Joaquin County, but I'm doing this for you. We do this because we want to check in with you, say hi. You can experience the museum anytime online. And when I mean online, you can experience it. Let's go to my screen here. and I'll share my screen. You can come, you can experience the museum anytime on our Facebook page. That's at Facebook at FANHS Museum, right? And then we do these live things, right? Like here's a thing where I talked pop up there. If you go, you know, I did a pop up yesterday. You know, you can go and review that. You can also see my interview with Dan Gonzalez, where I talked about the veterans and the veteranos and the difference between veterans here and veteranos Filipino in the Philippines in terms of that, you know, the Rescission Act of 1946. We get into that. Dan Gonzalez is the illustrious professor of ethnic studies, Filipino American, Asian American studies in the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State. You can also check out the video on Celestino Almeida. This is an interesting video that was done by the Fil-Ams Vets project in Washington, D.C. They're rolling out a whole new internet or web product that is historical based. You get interviews like from people like Celestino and others, and it's a great resource. You can access that through our Facebook Live page, or Facebook page at FANHS Museum. And then, of course, you know, there's more pop-ups for me where I talk about a number of things. This little pop-up is generally called This Week in Filipino American History. We'll get to that in a second. And well, let's see, this is the education project. Duty to Country, Under One Flag. It's the Filipino American veterans. Well, notice they say Filipino and American veterans of World War II. And that's the distinction that Dan and I draw in the previous interview about veteranos and veterans. But check that out. It's interesting. I like to talk to Dan a lot. I've known Dan a long time, and he is now Professor Emeritus at San Francisco State. So that doesn't mean he has a lot of time on his hands. It means that he's filled with knowledge and he's got stuff to say. And we're fortunate that we're able to talk to Dan. So anyway, consider all these assets. Yesterday, Terry Torres, another museum board member, did a Facebook Live, and she talked about what the campesinos found, or how the campesinos lived, and our exhibit showing the campesinos' living room. And it's interesting. One notable fact from Terry's Live yesterday is that I did not know that the campesinos built their furniture out of slats from boxes that they used out in the fields. Little known fact. I mean, is it an important fact? Well, it shows how resourceful Filipinos were, how DIY they were, and how you had to be DIY in the Philippines, or in America that time when you were a Filipino American campo. And keep in mind, these guys who came over were Filipino Americans. They were American nationals. They were able to come over without papers, right? Because they were colonized by the United States. They came to work here in the Central Valley, and they worked for essentially 10 cents an hour, about $1 a day. And this was their life. They lived in these work labor camps throughout the Delta. You can get their story. Check out Terry's video. It's also here on the Facebook Live site. And if you're not on Facebook, then definitely check out our YouTube channel, Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. Okay, so as I said, we like to call this section This Week in Filipino American History. And this sort of dovetails from what I was talking about with Terry's video about the campos and making the furniture. It was not an easy time for Filipinos in the 20s and 30s. And that's sort of the big takeaway. Most people don't know it because they're not taught it. most people don't know it because it's not you know, talked about in schools, or it's forgotten, you know, quite simply, because it's not convenient to know exactly what happened in here in the Central Valley, you know, to Filipinos. It's actually kind of painful even. So let me go to, let's see, I've got to reduce my screen so we can go to, here's a story. This happened last week. It's reported in the Pajaronian. And here is a shot, the historic Pajaronian file photo of, they show Filipinos playing at Philippine Gardens in a restaurant in 1980. And Roy Riccio is a director of this project that called for an apology from the city of Watsonville. And last week they did it. And I got notices from a lot of Filipino American Historical Society friends and Filipino American historians, most notably Theo Gonzalez, the professor, a former professor at University of Maryland, and also now with the Smithsonian. But the headline here, the Pajaronian, as of on the 11th, city pens official apology to Filipino community for 1930 race riots. This is a big deal because, you know, we like to talk about the violence against Filipinos all throughout the valley. And it happened all throughout the valley, from up north, from say Lodi, Sacramento, down south through Fresno and then to the west, you know, Watsonville, Monterey. And this is Watsonville, Pajaronian. And when I say Filipino American violence, I mean the minor transgressions to the major ones. The big one, I mean, we know there were riots and bombings in Stockton, where the museum was. In the 1930s, there was this one major riot, January of 1930, the one that most people know about and hear about because it does get reported, and you can Google it. But this project that people from Watsonville were trying to start, they noticed that there was never a formal apology by the city. And so they forced that. And then this week, or this past week, the Watsonville City Council apologized for the riots that ended in the death of one man. Let's read the story. A resolution brought forth by Mayor Rebecca Garcia for 5 days in January of 1930. Hundreds of armed white men took to the streets of Watsonville, targeting and beating Filipino American workers who they claimed were stealing their jobs and women, according to multiple reports. That's kind of this, that's the story, right? We've heard that. Not just, my father came in 1928. I like to say he did not go into Stockton, did not go to the fields. He stayed in the city to work in the restaurants. And some of my relatives did go into the fields. So this was a choice. If you were coming from one of the boats, the dollar steamships from the Philippines to America, this was the option you had. Stay in the cities like San Francisco, LA, or Seattle, or you go and become a migrant or work in the fields. So there were a number of these riots. The biggest one happened in Watsonville, January of 1930. The riots reached a head on the night of January 20th when 22-year-old Fermin Tobera died after being shot on San Juan Road. The incident was a catalyst for more riots instigated by white men around the state. It has been 90 years since the riots occurred. In 2011, Assemblyman Luis Alejo authored a landmark bill to apologize for California's discrimination towards Filipinos, which was passed by the state Senate. But no official apology by the city of Watsonville had been made until now. So, I mean, you can say an official apology The value of that, I mean, the state apologized for what it didn't do. What was the responsibility for the city? Is it more than just symbolic? I imagine if the state passed the law in 2011, logical that the city of Watsonville maybe should do the same. So, but it happens when you have people advocating, and it also happens when you have Watsonville's first Filipino American mayor, and they have one, Emil Quintero Bersamin, expressed his thanks to the current members for voting for it. He pointed out all the different people in attendance at the meeting. I did go to the meeting briefly. I attended at the beginning, but they were talking about transit, and I wasn't able to stay. But I'm glad they did go forth and make the apology. The mayor says there are a lot of old-time Watsonville names here, Filipino American names, but also white names, Latino names. It's a wonderful thing. I want to thank the council for taking this on. It's important. Like I said, this is a seminal Filipino story, or seminal, maybe not the word. This is the pattern, right? Filipinos come to America, they go to these towns, be it Stockton or Watsonville or Turlock or Exeter or Lodi or in the Delta. They experience these transgressions, some more major than others. Certainly Watsonville was the historic one that people remember. And so 2011, there was a state apology. This week, there was the apology by the city of Watsonville. It's symbolic because what we apologize for what? For not making the city police more responsive, for not protecting the Filipino American. You know the story about Fermin Tabera. Tabera was in a hall dancing with diamond dance girl, the taxi dancers. He was at a dance. He was in his bunk. Later, he went home to his bunk. He was in his bunk and he was shot in his bunk. From the records that I have seen. And so could the city have, of course, the city could have done more, should have done more. They didn't, because the majority of the city, or the whites who were rioting, were aligned with the leaders, and the leaders are aligned with, well, one can presume, if nothing has been done until now. So there were other speakers at this event, some who called for the physical recognition, such as a statue in the city plaza, a mural, or a school named in honor of a local Filipino figure. Newly appointed Cabrillo College board member Steve Trujillo, see that double L, it's tricky. See, if you're Filipino, it should be Trujillo. If you're Spanish, it would be Trujillo. They pitched the idea of a Filipino student center at the community college's Watsonville campus. Now that's good. These are good outcomes out of this. It's one thing to issue an apology and then move on and say, okay, history, you take care of the rest. But now people advocating for this apology need to push on. Let's have a statue. Let's have a monument. Let's have things named in honor of Filipinos. That's how you have these visible markers serve as historical markers of Filipino history throughout the state. And this is the state where the first Filipinos arrived, 1587, Morro Bay. And then throughout history, early 20th century, 1906, 1920s, 1930s, and then first major killing, Fermin Tabera, Watsonville, 1930. Some others who grew up in Watsonville, this Caitlin Cortez, now attends UC Berkeley. She thanked the council, said, "Hey, let's see more about the city helping the Filipino Scholarship Fund. Not a bad idea. Let's hope something like that happens." And of course, Rob Bonta was in on the Zoom. He was the first Filipino American state legislator in the history of California. He says, "I appreciate your willingness to issue this apology. It's deeply meaningful. It expresses an intention of inclusion and forward thinking. It's never the wrong time to do the right thing." That was Rob Bonta's quote in the Pajaronian. And it's important. I'm glad that they got it done. This is an example of what happens when community activism gets real, decides on a goal, and says, "Hey, look, we can honor history by making history now, by impacting history, the history of the Filipinos who worked in the fields." This is a shot from 1980. They're playing cards, familiar sight. And then here's the sign that really gets you: the "Get rid of all Filipinos or we'll burn this town down." This is a sign that was once posted around Watsonville, according to the Pajaronian, depicting the sentiments toward Filipinos during the time of the 1930 anti-Filipino riots. So when you see something like that, it kind of, you realize that the hate that existed in the 20s and 30s was real. It's not just a piece of historical fact that we just pass by, forget, or never get exposed to, which is more often the case, because who would like to admit, who in American academia, or who, I mean, the scholars would point to this, but the people who create the curriculum, the people who write the textbooks, when you're writing it from an American perspective, do you want something like this out there so people realize how racist America was in the 20s and 30s? Get rid of all Filipinos or we'll burn this town down. I mean, that's similar to the sign that let's see, let's go here. I think it's here. The sign that is being held up by Anita Bautista, one of our great founders of the museum. She's holding up a sign, and that sign is the famous one that says, "Absolutely no Filipinos allowed." So those are some of the key artifacts that remind us about how Filipino Americans were treated in the 20s, 30s. We don't forget. But unfortunately, for many people, they haven't even learned that lesson. They don't even remember, or they can't even recall that something as horribly racist as that even happened in their town, let alone in this great state of California, let alone in this great country of ours, emphasis ours. But this is one of the things that we point out in our stories that we tell at the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum, and that we tell here on our pop-ups. So the Pajaronian, really an important story that they did the apology. But let's see.
Hey, I think we're live. Hi, everyone. Let me just
as I like to say, is I'm fond of saying, check my little gizmos here.
Oh, I have to stop.
This is Emil Guillermo.
I have to stop.
I'm Emil Guillermo.
Okay, here.
Um,
Stop that sound.
Okay. Yeah, I have this funny little keyboard that jumps around and clicks on. Anyway, let's see what happens in Watsonville, and let's see what happens in other communities. What other communities do to bring out some of the hidden facts in their Filipino American history. Okay. And of course, contact us here at the museum if we can talk about it, if we can help preserve what happens. I'll put this article in on our Facebook page at Facebook at FANHS Museum, FANHS Museum. That essentially is our de facto museum page. It's dynamic, it changes, and it allows for interaction. So put down your comments in the chat, and when I get out of here or when we're done, I'll answer them. Or if I can somehow maneuver the technology, we'll answer them as we get them. But put them in the chat. So that's an important thing. What happened in Watsonville, but let me also bring things closer to home or closer to the museum in Stockton. A good friend of mine, Dylan Delvo, is the head of Little Manila Rising. And I bring this up and I put it on the Facebook page because it is a thing that, let's see, it's a thing that I knew about it because I had talked to Dylan, but I wanted him to break the story. The Rizal Social Club was torn down. And let's see if we can click this. This is, let me just play it here. There it is. You see it from the freeway. It's just a void. It's empty. They're watering it down, hosing it down. The Rizal Social Club was there, but if you've driven by the crosstown downtown, notice it's not there anymore. You know, it's vaguely reminiscent of the I Hotel, right? Vaguely reminiscent of the I Hotel and in San Francisco, where they tore it down. That's where the Filipinos lived. You know, Kearny Street, that was Manila Town in San Francisco. Well, this was Little Manila, right? The Rizal Social Club, one of the anchor spots. I remember when I first met Dylan in 2003, I came to Stockton to the Record to become a columnist and the diversity writer. And it was a big thing back then to have a diversity writer and to have a real paper that had a real staff. And boy, are those days long gone. But what got me about meeting Dylan and Don, his partner in crime there, to try to save those buildings, to save the area. Boy, their earnestness and their knowledge and their advocacy and their passion. So I know how important this building was. This building was not just to Don and to Dylan, but to the Filipino American community here in Stockton. And for all Filipino Americans, just as a symbol, this was our hall. This is where we did things. This is where we had our christenings. We had a christening in the Guillermo family yesterday in San Francisco, but it was kind of limited to just because of COVID. You know, people have marriages and christenings and all sorts of things and weddings, but it's different under COVID if you're going to be careful, right? Well, in the old days, we had the Rizal Social Club. So let me read from what Dylan wrote in the Little Manila Rising blog post. He says, it's with extreme heartbreak that we announce the demolition of the Rizal Social Club. As an organization, we are devastated but resolute to the long-term solutions necessary to truly save Little Manila. Please read on. So here's what happened. If you want to know, if you drive by there and you say to yourself, well, what happened? How could this possibly happen to this anchor of Little Manila? Well, in February 2020, just before the pandemic, city staff noticed a dip in the roof at the Rizal Social Club building, which prompted an inspection. The inspectors entered the property and found that the ceiling had collapsed in the rear of the building. The owner notified the city that the building would be fixed. In March, the owner passed away. The city consults with an independent engineer to create a report on the status of the structural integrity of the building. The report was completed in May of 2020. Now, keep in mind, no one at the Little Manila Rising, none of the Little Manila folks were notified that this was happening. This was all between the owner of the building and the city, right? So this report was completed in May. They found that the east wall was in danger of collapse and possibly by the next storm. Also, the independent engineer noted that the building was historic and a key building of the Little Manila historic site. Prior to this report, city staff was unaware of its historic nature, meaning the bureaucrats had no idea that this was even something that people cared about so much that they would protect it as an historical site. They were totally in the dark. So everyone's in the dark here, except these bureaucrats who say, well, we got to do something about this building. I guess we're going to tear it down because no one cares about it. Prompted by the independent engineer's note on the historic nature of the building, city staff contacted Little Manila Rising on July 23rd. That's the first time they hear about this. 2 months after the report was finished, they notified Little Manila Rising about the collapsed ceiling. Because remember, they weren't the owners. The owner had died. It was between the owner and the city. And now, finally, in July, all this stuff happened in February, right? It first happened in February, right? In February. Then finally, in July, they tell Little Manila Rising. As Dylan writes in the blog, this was a complete surprise to us, as the former owner always told us that the building was in great shape. We were always more concerned about the status of the neighboring Filipino Recreation Hall, the former Emerald Restaurant. Remember the Emerald? How many times have you eaten at the Emerald? And the Mariposa Hotel, another key part, right? They were always, I mean, the Rizal Social Club was maybe third, right? After those big three. On July 24th, Little Manila Rising LMR meets with city staff and is told that in order to save the building, LMR would have to take ownership of the building and create an engineering plan to save the building by July 29th. Oh, July 29th, and we're talking about July 24th, they met. They gave them 5 days. 5 days. That doesn't sound like a whole lot of respect for Little Manila. 5 days. Can you put it together in 5 days? Because we're going to shut this down, it sounds like. Otherwise, the city would have to have the building demolished as soon as possible because the collapse of the building could severely damage neighboring buildings. This began a frantic search by LMR for resources, including finding the support of a structural engineer, architect, lawyer, and possible financiers. On July 26, they sent an email to Mayor Michael Tubbs voicing frustration. Tubbs forwarded the email to the city manager and asked if something could be done. On July 27th, an assistant city manager was assigned to investigate what happened, and an extension until the end of August was granted to see if we could save the building. On August 1st, LMR. Now, mind you, all this started in February. Now it's August. It's getting down to crunch time. A pro bono architect and a member of Stockton's Cultural Heritage Board were allowed to access the damage. This is what they found. So, on August 2nd, the structural engineer and architect concluded that the walls of the building could be shored up and saved, but to do so meant clearing huge pieces of debris from the collapsed ceiling, which called for heavy equipment moved into the space. Unfortunately, there was no access route for heavy machinery to enter the building because other properties wedged the Rizal Social Club from all sides except the front. In other words, there was just no room to move these, the heavy equipment. To get that into the space meant the demolition of the front facade to enter the building. That's like, okay, well, in order to play our sport, we must get rid of our arms and our legs, and then we can play our sport. I don't see how you can do that. On the evening of August 2nd, the LMR board met to discuss what actions to take regarding the Rizal Social Club. We were left with the unusual circumstance that in order to save the building, we had to demolish the front of the building, which was not saving the building. We considered purchasing the property for $1 and then paying for the demolition, which would allow us to own the empty lot, but found that the cost of demolition would be too high since there was asbestos in the building, and because of its direct proximity to the neighboring buildings would be an intricate demolition. So you're in a tight space, sort of like being in my closet right now. With heavy equipment, you've had to damage the facade. Now with your big equipment, you might damage the buildings to the left and to the right of you, and topping it off, you've got asbestos damage. So the unexpected project would have taken away from our already existing plans to purchase the Legionaries del Trabajo building, where our current offices are, Little Manila Rising. With heavy hearts and tears shed, the LMR board voted to not pursue the purchase of the Rizal Social Club. So by the time they got the approval, or by the time they got the information, they realized it was too late. They couldn't do anything. And then it was October 22nd that the Rizal Social Club was demolished. Now, I heard about it. I think I talked to Dylan that day, coincidentally, about some other matter. And he mentioned it. And it wasn't until just this week that Dylan posted this blog post on the Little Manila Rising blog or website at littlemanila.org. So what can we say here? This is what Dylan wrote. It's a huge disadvantage, but it basically is the reason why it's an historical piece that's worth noting this week in Filipino American history. When Little Manila Rising first began advocating for the preservation of the buildings in the historic site, one of the things opponents would ask was, what right do you have to advocate for these buildings when you don't own any property in this area? And this is the historical link. People don't realize that the alien land laws were already enacted before the arrival of the Manong generation. Filipinos could not legally own land in America. The lack of our community to have the ability to advocate from a landlord or a landowner position has severely crippled our ability to save buildings and neighborhoods deemed historic by Filipino Americans. In other words, if you're not the owner, you have to enlist the owner's aid. You have to enlist the owner's sense of history, sense of compassion in order to get anything done. And if the owner is only in it for the money, in it for the tax advantage or whatever of owning the building or the potential of what a building could mean in the future, not necessarily to Filipinos, but to whomever, the historical aspect is usually not important. The historical aspect is usually downplayed. And look, the owner didn't even know The owner had it. They didn't act fast enough. The owner died. His heirs didn't know. The city got into it. They didn't realize historical value. By the time they got to Little Manila Rising, too late. It was July, then August. Too late. So this is the problem, and Dylan kind of hits it on the head here. He says the issue is further compounded in the Filipino American community in that without the ability to own property for the manang generation, there's no generational wealth created. In other words, if you were able to buy a house, that's your generational wealth. And if that house was to appreciate by a lot, that's your generational wealth. Now, that's equity, right? In land and in the house. And sometimes when Filipinos were prevented from owning property, I know farmers who were prevented from owning land that was owned by the railroad in, say, the Lathrop area, south of Stockton. They were allowed to lease it for $1. They were allowed to farm it and lease the buildings for $1, but they weren't allowed to own it. So when their farming days were over, the land wasn't theirs and they had wealth, but the railroad got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for the land. They sold to developers and they turned them into housing. That's how Filipinos got screwed in Lathrop, in that area south of Stockton, where you see houses now and developments, and you don't see Filipino wealth necessarily. So this idea of how generational wealth was created or prevented, a key historical aspect of this whole story. And as Dylan writes, generational wealth and access to old money is key to philanthropy, which continues to hinder the development of Filipino American nonprofit organizations today. Oh, like Little Manila Rising, like the FANHS Museum, like FANHS itself. This is also further exacerbated locally because statewide and national philanthropy has not focused on Stockton. Furthermore, most of the very wealthy in Stockton became rich by marginalizing South Stockton and shepherding white flight to North Stockton, which is why we can get a space, why the museum could get a space right there in downtown where it's empty. No one's there. Workers during the day, they leave it at 5 o'clock and it's empty and no one lives there. It's not a vibrant city life where people live and work. It is a place where people work 9 to 5 in offices and then abandon, except now, very few in offices now because of COVID. And that's why downtown is an empty shell, almost 24 hours a day, in a place where the homeless can call home because no one's there and because most people have taken the cue of white flight and moved to North Stockton. And that in that one paragraph that Dylan Delvo has written in the Little Manila Rising is really the history of Stockton. And I've known Stockton. I'm fond of telling this story about my father wanted to stay in San Francisco and went to San Francisco for, he worked in the restaurants. He wanted to cook the vegetables, not to pick the vegetables. But we went to Stockton and got our vegetables and got our lechon. And I talk about when we killed that pig and met my cousins who still live in Lathrop. They managed to become part of a thriving Filipino American middle class and own homes there. But the generational wealth that could have been had if they weren't leasing the property was not to be. So this is how history, the kind of racist, anti-Filipino history, how it hurts us. And when you see something that has withstood history, withstood the all the different things that have happened to Filipinos, from Fermín Tabera to the indignities at the labor camps, to making their own furniture out of the slats from boxes that they used in the fields, to absolutely no Filipino allowed signage on doors in Stockton. When you take it from the 20s and 30s and the 40s, and the war brides come, and the people fighting the war, and they come and become citizens, and the 50s and 60s, and how our community develops in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s, 2010, 2020. And then on October 22nd, the Rizal Social Club comes down. It's not going to be around to see how Filipino Americans work out the next obstacle that was handed to us, or that has evolved from history. That's what makes seeing the Rizal Social Club go down sad, because whether it was used or not, whether it was functional as a building, it stood as a monument of our Filipino history. Just being there, just the facade. And you saw they couldn't keep the facade to get the heavy machinery in to protect and shore up the walls and the ceilings. And then they had asbestos. And then it was like, oh my God, asbestos and a rotting building, losing proposition, cut your losses. And that was the decision process of how the Rizal Social Club came down. But go back to the Watsonville story, how they're thinking, oh, we need a physical monument. We need something. We need a statue. Well, better than a Confederate general, I'll tell you that. We need a statue or something in Watsonville. We need something to commemorate the Manongs, what they went through. And sometimes, we don't appreciate it until it's too late. But sometimes, hey, the buildings where the Manongs called, this was their culture. This was their social life. This was their life. In some ways, whether it was used or functional or not, that was enough. That stood for us. It stood. It was still around. It was erect. It was a building that served as our monument, our landmark. And partially because, as Dylan says later, our lack of generational wealth to say, we'll buy the damn building. We have the wherewithal. We wish to say, this is ours. We're going to keep it. It's gone. Maybe this is a lesson for us going forward, because certainly Little Manila Rising has done a number of great things. They got the Leonario's building. That's where their center is now. They're still closed down because of COVID, but they've got a piece, and they're preserving something that was important. That was important in Filipino American history in Stockton and in California. They are also trying to save the Emerald, trying to save the Mariposa. So Mariposa and the Emerald, two of the three still there. the Rizal Social Club not, but a reminder that even if the process is slow, every day those buildings keep standing, serve as a reminder of what we've been through, what we've endured, and the power and the strength to endure all the things that have happened to us. They're reminders of our history. So if you're in Stockton, drive by. I remember one of the images of Don Mabalin, the late Don Mabalin. I remember when I wrote that piece in the Record on the day of her funeral. She stood by that sign, the historic district site, in front of the on that block. They're important reminders. We wish we could do more with them. We wish we could turn them into our Alamo or our, I know, what would you like? I mean, I remember when Dylan and Don were first trying to get that site developed, that people wanted to build some kind of strip mall. They wanted to put someone had suggested a Ranch 99. It didn't come to fruition, but you look at the area and how do you make this a place where people want to live and it becomes a community again? These are the things or questions for the policy folks. And it's the reason why advocates, get involved in politics to make sure that they're heard and some of their ideas are shared. But, this is a thing that's happening in Stockton now. And I don't know if you're in a Filipino American community, San Francisco, Vallejo, look around, look at the places where the Filipinos roamed. Look at where we called our home or the places that were our neighborhoods, and see what's being done to preserve them in a Filipino way, if that's being done at all. But it should be thought about, because these are our relics. These are our historical markers. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up. I appreciate you sticking around and being with me as we talk about Little Manila and we talk about the Rizal Social Club. I want to end off with, let's see, something from my my Facebook site. What happened here? I'm trying to find on my Facebook site at Emil Guillermo. Where is it now? Here we are. Let's see. Emil Guillermo. There's the fundraiser right here. One of our generous donors, an old friend of mine, Brian McFadden, is offered to match $200. We get sometimes we get matches, not as often as you'd think, but it would be great if you would click on my post here. It's on my site at Emil Guillermo on Facebook, and don't make a fully tax deductible donation. This is up there as an incentive to give whatever you can. $5, $10. If we get 200, he'll match 200, and that'll help us. This was my birthday donation page, but we extended it because we just didn't get enough money. Chris Castro has another one on his site, but you can get to both. But this is special because we have a special match. So if you like our pop-ups, we do our pop-ups on Saturday and Sunday about 11:45, and we talk about Filipino American history. please, if you are so inclined, please remember to give. We are totally volunteer. Even the museum director's post is totally volunteer. The money that we get is primarily used to pay our rent for this gallery space that you see here. It's a 1,500 square foot gallery space. It has tons of information on Filipino American history, but of course, because of COVID, we're closed. So we can't do anything at the building, but we have to do things online, and we have to create. So now the technology is a pricey thing between Zoomcasts and whatnot. And we still have to pay the rent, because even though COVID has shut us down, COVID has not shut down the landlording business. Once again, going back to the whole idea of landlording, you know, Filipino Americans couldn't own land, you know, back in the 20s and 30s. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the Rizal Social Club was not theirs. And the bottom line, generational wealth. Historical. It's historical. So anyway, if you can, we just have a little ways to go. A few people have given, but since the match was announced, like to see a little more, please. Please, this is not, we're not begging you, of course, but we're asking you to be our hero. We're asking you to help us tell our stories, because that's what we do at the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. So that can be found on my Facebook page, Emil Guillermo. You say, what is Justice for Stefan, Emil? Another story that I'll save for another time. Today we spent time talking about Little Manila Rising and spent time talking about Watsonville. And I think that ought to do it. I think that ought to do it for us. So let's see. Here's our museum page. Thank you for joining us. You can see, if you want to binge watch all our, look, there are people who say, like, I've had it to here with Netflix. I've had it here with Prime Video. Okay, go to our FANHS Museum Facebook page. Facebook.com/FANHS, FANHS Museum, /live. And then look at all these videos. You get videos of me and videos of me talking to Dan. Oh, this is a good video here. The Celine video. The one, you know, we hear about the Filipino men, but do we hear about the Filipino women? This is a story about Filipino women, 1932, and what happened to Celine Navarro. And it's tied to a documentary that's out. I don't know. There should be links there to see the documentary, but this is about the story about the Navarro family, about a woman buried alive. You'll want to see this. That's an interesting one. And then, of course, you want to talk about Larry Itliong. Alex Idlor was a young man who was really a mentee. All right, saw Larry as a mentor. Check out his story. And then if you're still thinking about the veteranos, think about checking out these two videos about the women warriors, about women, Filipino women, who were on the front lines. They answered the call of Roosevelt in 1941 and then were full artillery shooting the enemy. Did they get any of the equity pay? Well, because of the Rescission Act in 1946, no. But for those who might have, women were excluded. Why? Why were women, unless you were a nurse? But if you were on the front lines with a gun, you were excluded. Check out the interviews, find out that story, and then you can thank me for your outrage. because you will be outraged when you find out. In many ways, that's what history is about. Finding out the missing links that explains your outrage. When you get the facts, you realize, oh my God, did that really happen? Yeah, it did. So I want to thank you again, everyone, for just being here. Pop-ups. You know, I like this pop-up idea because, you know, as you can tell, I can talk for a long time. But sometimes we'll have guests like on these videos, but sometimes it's just me talking about something important in history. So this is our way of doing it. This is our way of checking in with you, you checking in with us. Museum is closed once again this weekend, but we do this every Saturday and Sunday, 11:45 to about 12:15 or thereabouts, and we might go longer, trying to impart some Filipino American history. If you missed any or all of this, the replay will be up on our FANHS Facebook site, maybe on our YouTube site as well, but you can catch it here on our Facebook at FANHS. Let's see, Facebook at FANHS Museum, FANHS, FANHS Museum /live, all our videos. That's it. Enjoy your the rest of your Sunday. I had an ubi muffin yesterday. I'd frozen it, and even frozen at the beginning of the pandemic. So that's like 8 months ago. Man, it was still good. I mean, it was, and it just reminded me of why purple is a favorite color of mine now. Anyway, have yourselves a great rest of the day and a great week. We might pop up with pop-ups during the week, shorter ones, but valuable ones just the same. Check our FANHS Facebook page. And if you want to know, if you want to get on our list to find out when, there are little places to click to say, hey, let me know when you're live. Or you can subscribe, send me your email to emilamok@gmail.com, emilamok@gmail.com. Or I'm going to use this because it seems to be easy, and some of you have this email. Send it to me at filipinomuseum@gmail.com, and I will put you on the list. And as soon as I go live, I'll send you an email. You'll know about it, and you'll say, hey, something's there. A pop-up. Thank you again. Have a great Sunday. Oh, I got to stop sharing first. Have yourselves a great Sunday. As my friend, the late Don Mabalan would say, mahals and salamats.